introduce the next two speakers. Wade Lewis is an immersive technology applications engineer at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. He is passionate in uncovering ways to leverage immersive and emerging technologies to bring human-centered solutions to life for current and future warfighters. He is a member of APL's Augmented Virtual Mixed Extended Reality Technology Center of Excellence, the XR Collaboration Center, and the Immersive Technology Lead for the Tactical Advancements for the Next Generation, also known as TANG, program's holodeck team. He has experience in the creation of interactive and immersive real-time 3D experiences, hands-on software development with a broad variety of AR and VR devices, user experience design, and rapid prototyping. His project work to visualization and simulation ranges from the medical triage in the battlefield and high-risk scenarios to future concepts of Navy surface and subsurface operations. And then we also have Kels Gorge, is a mechanical engineer and an XR developer at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. She earned her master's degree in mechanical engineering from Johns Hopkins University and has embraced XR as a tool to enhance engineering and drive innovation. With a passion for rapid prototyping, she combines traditional engineering with immersive technology to build innovative solutions that brings ideas to life. Please welcome Kels and Wade.
Imagine a spaceship flying through the stars. Picture yourself in the control room. You're at the helm of the ship. The controls are in front of you. You've got panels and screens, instruments and dials. And when you look through the window, a blue planet looms below. So picture that control room. What did it look like? What was on the screens? How many windows were there? Were you picturing something high-tech and futuristic, like this? I was picturing something a little more retro, like that. Sorry, we're gonna fix that. There we go. Perhaps you were imagining something based on what you already know, something familiar, something straight out of science fiction. Or perhaps you were thinking of something a little closer to home. Each and every one of you was picturing something different, something unique. We all have different memories and experiences, and that gives us different perspectives. But the ability to see the same thing, that's what XR can do for us. I'm Kels Gorge. I work at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, and I'm part of the U.S. Navy's Tactical Advancements for the Next Generation, or TANG program. As a mechanical engineer, I love hardware and building physical prototypes. And as an XR developer, I love building virtual prototypes to bring ideas to life.
And I'm Wade Lewis. As the TANG program's immersive technology lead, I drive the design and development of our XR experiences to bring human-centered solutions to life. So what is the TANG program? Well, we are a multi-organizational U.S. Navy program that operates here out of the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. We use human-centered design to tackle what we call gnarly challenges. We do that by blending 3 different groups together, which you can see on this, our favorite Venn diagram. So starting with folks like you all, the technical experts, we'll blend an understanding of what's possible, or those amazing ideas that you all have, with an understanding of what's realistic or what's viable from our decision makers or our stakeholders. And that first-hand knowledge of what it's like to be in the field from our warfighters. And what we've seen across every single project is that impact happens at the center, where all of these groups are at the same table, having a conversation. We've lowered those barriers so that now we can really together make solutions that truly make a difference.
If you're going to build something for a user, you need to understand their experience. And the best way to understand something is to experience it for yourself. That's empathy. Our team goes on research trips. We go out in the field, meet the warfighters where they are. We want to learn not just what they do, but how do they do it? What is a day in the life like? I can tell you that a pilot's gear is heavy, but it's another thing entirely to put that gear on, sit in the cockpit, and feel the weight of that helmet as it pulls your head forward. When you feel that for yourself, that builds empathy. And man, that'll change your perspective.
So we have found that XR has this amazing ability to rapidly merge ideas and different perspectives with new ways to experience them.
XR builds a collective understanding. It's an amazing storytelling tool that allows us to build empathy and see a perspective that we couldn't before.
XR transforms ideas into a shared experience, allowing us to take something that's in our head and build it into something that you can reach out and grab, something that we can all experience together.
And XR accelerates the feedback and iteration process. It drives the design forward, allowing us to break down those barriers between you, your users, and your stakeholders, and build that high-impact design that gets to the field, something that works.
So today, we're going to show you how we use XR in the Tang program to do these 3 things.
Stories help us understand. The best stories paint a picture. You can imagine that you're really there. XR allows us to tell immersive stories. And that takes us to the next level because now we can understand together.
So one of my favorite stories centers around creating the surface bridge of the future for surface ships in the Navy. Now, as somebody who, prior to this project, had never really been on a surface ship before, I didn't even know what a surface ship looked like. That was kind of scary. I didn't know where to start. But our team got the opportunity to go underway on the USS Essex LHD-2 for 2 weeks, traveling from San Diego to Pearl Harbor about 2 years ago. Now, this was an amazing experience. Being able to stand side by side with the warfighters, seeing the same things they were, using the same equipment, it was incredible. Being able to ask them questions, not just in an interview maybe here at APL, but actually there while we're on the ship, in context of where they're actually doing this work, it was amazing. And many of those moments have stood out to me ever since. Sometimes that looked like waking up early for things like flight operations, getting to see lots of different helicopters or aircraft take off or land from the flight deck. But it wasn't just about the cool events that happened, it was also about what it took on the bridge to make this happen. And so one of the really cool things I learned is that sometimes, well actually almost all the time, it's very important to pay attention to the wind profile because the direction of the ship can impact the way or how hard it is for a helicopter to land or take off because of the wind. Other moments looked like staying up late to get a personal lesson on what it was like to, or what it takes to use that very helm console to steer the USS Essex. Now, when I first saw this as a software developer, I had no idea where to start.
And as a mechanical engineer, that's not like anything I've ever built.
But it was amazing to be able to stand there with the warfighters and ask about what every single instrument did. They even offered if I wanted to steer the ship, and I was like, yeah, maybe it's better if I don't. But it was incredible to learn all of that in context. And so there is value for experiencing things for yourself. You build an understanding that is just tough to achieve otherwise. But there's something missing here. Because I took lots of photos, and they turned out fantastic. Honestly, there's so many photos, we could go through a separate presentation on just this experience. But what the photos don't communicate is how hard this trip was. So here's a photo of us in the berthing area, and that is the rack that I slept on, right there. You can't even really sit up. It's not a lot of room. You have enough room to sort of roll your way into it and flip over, but you can't sit up, and you don't want to bang your head, right? So imagine living on that for 2 weeks. What about for several months, right, while you're on the ship? And just below that, the little storage space, that was all the personal space I got for all of my personal items, clothes, shoes, everything for those 2 weeks. That was tough. And we were constantly on our feet. When you're on the bridge, there are no chairs unless you're the CO or XO. And when we would do things like watch flight operations, we would stand outside where we were also standing. You can even see it in this picture. I'm taking the weight off of one foot because we had probably been standing for 2 to 3 hours on the bridge that morning and another 2 to 3 hours watching flight ops. Right? So this is tough. Imagine what that's like for your average warfighter who wakes up every single day, spends 4 hours on watch with at least one hand on the helm wheel at all times, paying attention to all of the instruments on that console that we talked about right in front of them, and listening to various commands from the conning officer. Now, we wanted to bring a taste of this back to our team because we couldn't take the entire Tang program with us to go see what this was like. So what we decided to do was look to VR, to bring a taste of this back home. And we built out a virtual reality experience that allowed us to actually go and explore what it was like to actually do these things on a surface bridge. We built out 3 different personas. There was an officer of the deck, a helmsman, and a lookout, where you would perform the various tasks or duties that you had to in that role. And then we brought in some warfighters to see if our understanding matched their reality, like what they actually remember it as being like. So one of the pieces of feedback we got was, wow, this is my ship. How did you recreate my ship? And she didn't just say, oh, this is just like what I remember. She said, that is my ship, where she spent days and days, right, doing everything. And so right away, she was taken back to this place she was extremely familiar with. And then a couple weeks later, we brought in some more warfighters, and one of them, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, said, do I smell seawater? Now, we certainly were not pumping the smell of seawater into the room.
Even though we joked about it a few times.
But it was an amazing way to see just how, like an early indication of how we could bring memories back from what somebody had done before and resurface that in virtual reality. So we knew we were onto something, and then we took it back to our team and to see what the team could learn from it.
The only thing I've ever driven is a car. And maybe I could sail a sailboat. But imagine driving a warship. When I was able to walk around the bridge of the ship in this virtual experience, I could see things that I couldn't see otherwise. I could stand where the lookout would stand and see what they would see. I could stand where the helmsman would stand and see the controls in front of me. This virtual experience allowed me to understand the space, just starting to understand it in a new way. And then when I was able to go onto a real ship for the first time, I was able to talk to the helmsman, and I was able to talk to the lookout, and have a different sort of conversation than I would have been able to otherwise. That changed my perspective.
So going on the Essex was an amazing way to experience designs that exist today. And when we came back, we started to say, well, what ideas do we have already for starting to build this out, this future bridge? And what we realized was there's actually a lot of concepts that the sailors themselves had already built. So one example, and I wish I had a picture of it, was on the Essex, there was these little boxes that would be up on the front row. So the consoles that are just behind those windows there's these wooden boxes that were about a foot tall. And the idea was that for sailors who maybe were a little bit shorter, they could step up onto those boxes to then get a better view out of the windows. That was really great. Even for me, at times I would want to step up onto those because when things like flight ops were happening, it allowed me to look down through the window and see what spot a helicopter had landed in. Now, this is probably not the design that we want for the future. We're probably not going to want to put boxes in front of every single console. But we love seeing that because what it really does is it communicates the design or the real need that the warfighters want in order to accomplish their jobs. So what we found with XR is we can take ideas like that, a bunch of them, and blend them all together to turn those things that maybe is just in one person's head into something that we can all experience together. The thing is, how do you design for something that doesn't exist? Something that no one has ever seen before. No sailor has been on watch. Maybe there's not even a CAD model. Maybe it's something where the sailors who are going to be on this platform won't be born for another 20 years. How do we take or start to come up with ideas for that and turn them into reality?
If we want to brainstorm that next big idea, we need to break away from the "that's how we've always done it" mentality. When we bring in the warfighter, whether officer or enlisted, nobody's in uniform. In the Tang program, we often say a good idea can come from anywhere. And when you have that idea, we write it down on a sticky note and throw it on the wall. That's our way of taking something that's just an idea in one person's head and putting it out there so that we can start to work on it together. We always say, if it's not on a sticky, it didn't happen. Visually representing your ideas is important if I'm going to understand what's in your head. And even better is if you can sketch the idea. Now we can start to really picture the same thing, understand a little more of the story behind it. This is a pilot in a haptic vest interfacing with a future aircraft.
My sketches do not look that good.
And mine don't either. But the point is that this sketch allows us to start picturing the same thing and building it together. And when I say building it, I mean we can start building on it. Rapid prototyping is an amazing way to get people hands-on. You can start to explore that idea, not just what it looks like, but now you can see the warfighters' intention behind it, how they would use and interact with it. And it doesn't have to be fancy. These are low-fidelity prototypes. This is just construction paper and tape and an old painter's suit from the hardware store. But this is enough to get people up and moving, and now we can talk about this idea and just start to interact with it.
So after we've worked with the warfighters, we'll take this back to our team and synthesize those ideas a bit. Sometimes we'll blend them together or refine them just a little bit, and then we love to create these detailed renderings. These are amazing because they're fast to make, fast to iterate on, even faster to throw out if we decide, you know what, that's not going to work. But they're an amazing way to start to get an idea of what it is that we want to build before we actually go off and build it. And then once we have these, we can start adding in those personas. So we talked about earlier that lookout, helmsman, or the officer of the deck. In this case, thinking about that pilot, what was that pilot doing 10 minutes ago? What is their mission currently? What are they thinking about in this moment? What are they about to do, or what do they need to do in the next 10 minutes, right? And so things like that allow us to start diving into the details a little bit more. And in this case, you can see there's a pilot who's visualizing some kind of augmented reality content over top of the terrain in front of them. But we don't end there, because now we can actually, with XR, take the user and put them in the design. So now they're the ones who are sitting in the cockpit, interacting with this in real time as the design changes. They can watch those augmented reality rings in front of them come towards them, right, as they are navigating forward or taking off from this landing strip that's there. And by incorporating things like objectives or tasks and having the user go through these steps, it allows us to really dive into the details and find those moments that matter.
Throughout these steps, we've seen how escalating fidelity allows us to explore an idea in a new way, taking it from something that's just an idea in one person's head and building it into something that we can work on together. And XR takes us to the next level, because now we can build an interactive, immersive prototype. We can now see the same thing. And that changes our conversation.
But getting to a shared understanding is really just the beginning. XR accelerates how we get feedback, when we get feedback, and what we do with that feedback, like how we drive the design forward.
But there's a funny thing about feedback. The longer you work on something, the more you can start to fall in love with it. I do. But the more you fall in love with your idea, the harder it can be to accept feedback.
So now imagine that you just spent several years and several $1 million working on the idea that you think is going to change the industry that you work in. But you haven't gotten feedback yet. And you finally go to get feedback. And what you hear is the users, they don't really like it. It doesn't work. Maybe they don't have a use case for it. Are you really going to be willing to accept that feedback to make the change happen? Probably not. So getting good feedback is tough, especially feedback that you want to do something with, like that you can actually work with. What we found with XR is when you get a user really immersed in a headset, put them in the context of the problem space where they're used to being, all of a sudden, it's like a switch flips. And now they're back on watch, doing the things that they've always done. It's just like any other day. And the quality of the feedback increases exponentially. So many times in the XR industry, we talk about using virtual reality to transport the user to some new world, some place they've never been before. But if we're being honest, sometimes it's actually about taking you back to where you've already been. And that's when we can show them something new.
Like the bridge of a future surface ship. Even though this is something they've never seen before, now when the warfighter puts on that headset, they can picture themselves on watch, doing the tasks that they do. We want feedback on those big ideas that we've come up with. Maybe that's the floor-to-ceiling holographic windows. How does that change, maybe when you look out on the flight deck? But we also want feedback on the small things. Again and again, we heard that man, I just wish I had a cup holder. Like little things, small things that just make your life better. Because you're not just working here, you're living in this space. So you bet that we put a cup holder in this model. And now this starts to feel like something they can relate to. And we start getting that effortless feedback that we need. And even better, sometimes they're not just commenting on what's there. We've seen people build on ideas, talking about new things that we hadn't considered. This is an amazing way to come up with new ideas, and then we can integrate them. And we know, like we said earlier, that a good idea can come from anywhere. We want to engage with both the current warfighter as well as the future generation. So we can show these experiences to a child at Bring Your Child to Work Day. But we can also show these to midshipmen at the Naval Academy. We can pack up a few headsets, a few computers, take this show on the road, meet the user where they are. Now, we can get feedback at a scale we never could before.
And accelerating the pace that we get feedback also allows us to accelerate how fast we iterate on this design. We love to give the users the ability to iterate in real time. And so sometimes what that means is being able to reach out and grab something and move it to the place where they want it to be. Sometimes that means toggling different types of information or displays. And sometimes it's as simple as giving them the ability to draw in 3D. Not just on a sticky note or something 2D, but actually over top of the design that we're working with so that they can properly communicate the change that they want to see.
And as a developer, we have the tools to integrate these changes so quickly. If a user tells me that they need a console turned purple and moved over there, we can do that. We can do that so fast, sometimes while they're still in the headset. This accelerates the way that we get feedback in a way that you couldn't before. We can understand what works, what doesn't, and get to the heart of what the user really needs. And then, when we take this back to the stakeholders, to your technical experts and the decision makers, we can show them this same experience because we need their buy-in if we're going to get this to the field. They can understand our idea differently when they can experience an immersive prototype. They can start to understand not just what the design is, but why. Why was it the design that way? What matters most to the user? They can understand why it works. That changes the conversation among you and the users and stakeholders and the technical experts. And that's how we build that high-impact solution.
So last summer, we were down at the Navy Yard giving a presentation out to a captain about what we had come up with for, alongside the warfighters for this future surface bridge project. And we weren't showing him this yet. We had showed him a lot of those earlier versions of different visualizations, different concepts that we had created. And there's actually roughly 13 or 14 of them in here that are all blended together, including those floor-to-ceiling windows that you can see there. Now, after we had given him this presentation, he said, well, I really love these ideas. I can tell a lot of thought went into them. I can see why the warfighters are asking for these things because they just make sense. The thing is, though, he wasn't really sure if this was something that we could or should commit to, because that's a lot of effort. We changed the design of the surface ship, or of the bridge, a lot. And so looking at this, he was like, I'm just not really confident that this is where we need to go. Like, why should I be investing in this? So I was sitting there and I said, well, sir, we brought this VR headset along with us and we took a lot of these ideas and built them into an experience. We would love it if you could just take a couple minutes and pop the headset on and take a look at it. And so he put it on and probably inside of a minute, he said, wow, I understand now. I can see why they're asking for these things because in the example of the windows, he could look down onto the ship and see everything that was happening around him. He had such a wider perspective of what was going on outside of the ship. And then there was this magic moment where he started pulling from his previous experiences as the commanding officer on a surface ship. And he said, well, actually, if I was standing here, I would need access to. And then he started listing off all of these other things that we hadn't even heard yet in our feedback process. And so we absolutely love it when this happens. It's not just for this project. It happens all the time. And it's really fantastic when it does.
XR changes the conversation at every level of the design process. XR allows us to build a collective understanding through storytelling. It's an amazing empathy building tool because now you can see something from a perspective that you couldn't before. XR allows us to transform ideas into something interactive, something that you can reach out and grab, and something we can build together. And XR accelerates the feedback and iteration process. It drives our design forward and allows us to break down barriers between you, the users, and the stakeholders. That changes the conversation. And that's how we get that high impact solution together. So, the next time you've got your big, unique idea.
How might XR change your conversations? Thank you. It looks like we have about 5 minutes for questions, if there are any.
I'm just curious, who was picturing a high-tech spaceship at the beginning? High-tech? Who's high-tech? Okay, okay. Any Star Trek fans? Or anybody's picturing, okay, the Brit, yeah? Yeah, okay, fair. Retro? Any retro, because that was me. Okay, okay. Just curious. Any other questions?
So when you put in the coffee cup, did you have somebody slap some armor or wear into the cap and you get the real feel for what happened?
That's like the first thing everybody does. They'll pick up a cup of some kind and try to throw it or whatever. And we're like, you wouldn't do that in real life, so why are you doing that here? But, you know.
And I personally made it so that, for, like on that Surface Bridge one, when you put that, it goes right back to where it should because I keep a very clean ship.
Okay, so I have a question. When you designed the future deck, or let's say when you finished ideating and drafting what that was going to be, what was the turnaround time between the idea and the drawing on the sketches to here it is in VR?
Yeah, that's a great question. The very simple answer is it really depends on the project. However, what we found is that various levels of fidelity work for different projects. So sometimes we are more interested in gray boxing out what it actually looks like. So what we will do, and shout out to our artist Ben Smith over here, where Ben said, I'm going to take this one design and make everything this sort of like tan grayish color so that we're not so focused on all of the details and the textures. It allows him to turn it around faster, but also allows us to build the thing in a way that people aren't so focused on it being perfect. They're more focused on the design. Other times, for this experience, we had already gone through a lot of the design process, or like iterating on those features. So the goal of the future Surface ship model, if I can go back a few, this one, the goal for here was really to kind of showcase a lot of those ideas in different ways. So that was where we wanted a little bit more detail. Most of our experiences, we try to turn it around in terms of like several months, but it really depends. And one of the things I say all the time is like, if we just want art, that's really only like halfway there because a lot of the, when you're thinking about behaviors or interactions, those also take a lot of time, but sometimes those are ways that you can really dive into the details. Like how a user actually wants to interact with something matters just as much as the level of detail that you're looking at.
So many times when you take ideas like this to decision makers, they want to understand what are the more important changes that you're trying to propose. So weighting, scoring, activities that are going on with this that led you to either put something into the proposed deck of the future or maybe not put it in.
That's a great question. And honestly, that falls back to the fundamentals of the human-centered design process, which, part of that is our whole thesis, is that, XR enhances human-centered design. So, we have different phases of these projects, and, while we're the human-centered designers, that's why we're working alongside the warfighter, the experts, and the stakeholders, the decision makers, because they're the ones that need to weigh in to establish those priorities and figure out how we can get it there. So I guess the answer is, it kind of depends. but you know, that's why we work with everybody whose opinion matters.
And that's why we get feedback so much as well, because a lot of the designs in here, if somebody said, well, actually, we don't like that design, we're all like, okay, sure, we'll throw it out. I mean, there are certain ideas in here that maybe we might be more attached to than others, but honestly, at the end of the day, it's about what works for the warfighter. And so we're not spending years of our time building one thing before finally getting feedback. We're taking this to the warfighter as much as possible to figure out what works and what doesn't.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all.
Wade and Kells.
Kellis.
Kells, sorry.
Kellis. It's fine. Kellis.